Now, yesterday, I took part in an online debate, you can find it on YouTube, with a rabbi. We had to be polite and civil, and I think I kept it together pretty well. But part of me wanted to grab him by the neck and say, what the fuck are you talking about? Because he was denying reality. It's illegal in this country to deny the Holocaust. It's not illegal to deny the Nakba. If there was a law against history denial, then most Jewish professors in this country would be in jail because they deny reality. If there's anything to be gleaned that's positive from the current horror, is that a lot more people are waking up, is that the old narrative are no longer covering the reality. And there's a shock right now for a lot of people. A lot of people of goodwill, not necessarily Jews or Palestinians, are just so uncomfortable. There's such heaviness in people's hearts. And the narrative that they've been fed, not just from the Jewish community or the official Jewish community, but also by the media, by the governments. You know, the same media that brought us the Vietnam War and lied about it for years. And the same media that brought us the weapons of mass destruction now brings us Israel's right to defend itself. The utter inability of most people for 1 second to put themselves into the mindset of Palestinians. This rabbi I was talking to yesterday, he said, how come after 3 generations they're still talking about refugees? Unbelievable. Meanwhile, he talks about the Jews after 2,000 years being exiles. I mean, the disconnect, the dissociation is, let alone the hypocrisy, is utterly unfathomable. When Simone is told, or when Naomi is told, or I'm told, that us as Jews speaking out against Israeli, I don't want to call it policy. I want to call it, it's not just a policy. It's a whole ideology. It's a whole historical aggression. It's not just a policy. But when we speak out against it, they're telling us, you're promoting anti-Semitism. Well, that's too ridiculous to be taken seriously. Because I'm saying to these people, what's between your ears? The whole world is watching Palestinian children having to have amputations without anesthetic on kitchen tables. That's the reality. And all the Jewish leaders are supporting it in the name of the Jewish people. Well, how does that look to non-Jews of goodwill? And what do you think promotes anti-Semitism? You and the state of the Jews doing this in our name? Or Jews actually speaking out against it? In Israel right now, Simone was telling me tonight over dinner, and you read about this in the Israeli press, they don't show any pictures of Gaza. They show pictures of Israeli soldiers, but they don't show what's happening to the Palestinians. What they show, night after night after night, is pictures of October the 7th and the victims of October the 7th. And they were victims, they were genuine victims. It's like trauma pornography is what it is. And keep talking about Jewish trauma, you know, the Holocaust and all that Jews have suffered, but we've never healed that trauma. We've sublimated it. We've, as Naomi points out in her book, we've created the opposite, the tough, muscular, tanned Israeli soldier who rides roughshod over 12-year-old children. Of the hostages, or in this conversation yesterday, the so-called neutral moderator was asking about the hostages. Well, what about the thousands of Palestinian hostages tortured in Israeli jails? I was there last year. I worked with some of them. Amongst the Israeli prisoners, I should say, the Palestinian prisoners exchanged for the hostages, the majority were between 12 and 17 years of age. And these kids get beaten in Israeli jails. You know what their crime is? Their crime is painting as anti-occupation graffiti, throwing stones at an Israeli tank, posting anti-occupation messages on the internet. They get arrested for it and taken for jail. we keep wallowing in our trauma in order not to have to recognize the trauma that we've inflicted on another people, and we continue to. We live in the Western world. Now, the Western world has got a long history of colonialism. The Belgians killed 10 or 12 million Africans about 120 years ago. In a few years. Did you ever read about that in your schools? Did you know that after the Second World War, the Dutch killed nearly 300,000 Indonesians in an attempt to hold on to their colonies? Anybody ever teach you that? Anybody ever teach you that in the 1990s? Raise your hand if you've heard about this, and this is probably a progressive audience. But have you heard that in the 1990s, 100,000 Guatemalan indigenous people were massacred by the army that was trained by the Israeli army? Raise your hand if you knew about that. Even in this audience, it's a minority. These are the things we never talk about. If you went to school in Canada, raise your hand if anybody ever told you when you were in school that here in this province, in the 1960s, an indigenous child, if they spoke their native tongue, they could have a pin stuck in their tongue. Raise your hand if they told you that in school. In school, did they tell you that? Very few. So we live in a world where the attitude and the denial of the colonialist is dominant. And so naturally, Israel's colonization of Palestine is just taken for granted. It's not a crime, it's just the way it needs to be. The reason the media and the politicians protect Israel so much, because it fits in so well with this privileged, colonialist, globalist mindset. So we're not just up against the official Jewish leadership, the Jewish trauma vortex that a lot of people are still totally caught in. We're also up against a system that is much larger than this particular issue. And so that in challenging this narrative, we also have to challenge the narrative and the colonization of our own minds. Thank you.